Hi, welcome to Behind the Scenes with Button Shy Games. My name is Tyson Mertlich, and I'm going to take you today on an interview with Dustin Dobson. He is the designer of Skulls of Sedlec, coming out from Button Shy Games, and we're going to talk today a little bit about that and a little bit about Dustin. Dustin, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time out of your schedule to chat with me. I'm looking forward to this. To get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and what got you into tabletop games as a whole?
Yeah, so I'm obviously a game designer. I live in Los Angeles, California. Um, I got into tabletop games pretty early as a kid, playing classic card games or abstract games like chess or checkers with my family. So Monopoly, all those pretty classic board games. Growing up as a kid, playing with family and friends. So always was interested in games and really liked that kind of social aspect, playing games with like as a kid. And I never kind of got away from that. I always really enjoyed games, and my as a kid though, I remember one point where a friend brought in Dungeons and Dragons, and we played Dungeons and Dragons for the first time. And so after that, that was my first time. I was like, oh my, this is so cool. I could do this. I could make a game, and I started making my own role playing game, building out a world, creating the rules. Um, and that was my first kind of foray into actually designing games. Um, and I think some of my friends are still playing that game to this day. Like old neighborhood, it's grown into this massive kind of simulation game, and it's very complicated. But that was my first time kind of designing my own little game. But I was a creative kid. Do it is like building robots or like I was drawing. I had a knack for drawing as well. And I decided I wanted to get into video games actually. So I focused on doing art for video games. I went to school for that, um, and and got into the industry. And I've been in the industry, in the video game industry, for like about 18 years. And throughout the my career, I was originally an artist for most of that time. Eventually, a producer towards my later part of my career. But I worked on some really great games. Really fortunate to work with some amazing talent. So worked on Saints Row 1 and 2. I worked on the latest game I worked on was God of War 2018, which was a massive success.
Wow, yeah.
So really awesome to be part of that team.
No, yeah,
Um,
that's quite the pedigree so far. I mean, and you haven't even gotten into the board game stuff yet, but I just wanted to say as far as designing games, I think you could have stopped at your D&D game because if it's being played still to this day, that in and of itself is quite the accomplishment.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. Throughout the whole time though, I always kind of came back to board games, and I was always tinkering around with making my own games. But with a full-time job, it was hard for me to just focus and finish anything. So getting back to the board game and the tabletop games, I decided after God of War shipped that is an area that I wanted to focus on and just kind of make my own games for a little while. Obviously, God of War is a huge team, like 300 people, but I wanted to kind of do my own creative thing for a little while. So yeah, after God of War shipped, a few months after that, I ended up taking a leap to just start my own little board game design project and become a board game designer.
Yeah, no, and I think that's where we're gonna probably focus a lot today, obviously, since we're talking button shy here. But to say that you haven't had experience is going to be a obvious flaw. Like, obviously, you've got quite a bit behind you in regards to game design. And you mentioned that you did the art and did all of that. I've seen some of your prototypes, what you make as prototypes, and what you're able to bring up. And I've got some design affinity myself. And as such, I am envious constantly of your ability to make beautiful looking prototypes. And so I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit as we go on, but I just wanted to point that out. So, what in general then brought you into playing board games, or what about board games rather, is it that you like? What about that medium are you interested in?
So I remember, like couch co-op. I'm going to talk about video games just for a second as a segue, but couch co-op games was just this awesome moment for me, like playing GoldenEye back in the day, sitting with friends and just like just having that great moment together. And I feel like kind of is missing from video games in the modern day and age with a lot of online stuff. So I really like the socialization aspect of board games, getting together with friends and family, and just having a great time, right? And so games can definitely facilitate that, or challenging each other in a competitive game, right? So I've always loved that. But I also found, especially now more lately, I really enjoy playing games to kind of peek under the hood, like look at how people play. Like just I get even more than winning, or like I always obviously play to win every game, but the ultimate joy I get out of games is just watching people's minds work, figuring out the puzzles of games, or figuring out what they're doing strategy wise, and watching their little aha moments. And likewise, figuring out the game, like trying to figure out what makes this game work, and why is this game interesting, and what's going on under the hood. So I kind of look at it from like a engineer point of view, I guess, which sometimes breaks down some of the magic, but I enjoy it. I enjoy like kind of taking things apart and figuring out what makes it click. So that's part of the reason I enjoy board games.
I've noticed that a lot of game designers have some sort of technical or analytic type of a background, and I don't know whether or not that's a fallacy or like a confirmation bias of my own, but I've noticed that tends to be it. So when you sit there and you're able to watch somebody play your game and be able to see, oh, you are pulling out those strategies that I really like, it is very satisfying. So I'm glad to hear that that's your experience. So then I think that brings us to this point of, why are we talking about Dustin Dobson coming in a Button Shy segment? So what brought you into the Button Shy fold? How did you get started with Button Shy?
Yeah, I think it was pretty fortunate timing that when I left the video game world and decided I was going to focus on board games, I think I had heard maybe Button Shy, but not too familiar with it. But it was their September of 2019's design challenge, which was design an 18 card game using all 18 identical cards, and it just sounded crazy, right? And so I had to do it. Like I think a lot of people did. It was like, that's impossible. There's no way, right? And then it's like, well, I got an idea. I'll try it out. Oh, hey, there's something there, right? And yeah, so it would just happen to be that it was just kind of a perfect segue into me being like, I'm going to focus on something. I'm going to focus on, not just doing a massive big project, but something with a deadline and something that's pretty focused with crazy constraints. And yeah, the rest is history. I've entered into, I think, 4 different design challenges now.
Yeah, and I've participated in some of those design challenges with you, and I've been able to watch some of these other things that you've worked on. And every time you've created, I've thought your process and your what you've come up with were very clever, and the way that you approach the design, I think, is really fascinating. Because I think it's interesting to take these design competitions from an approach that is a kind of more of a professional approach, because you have the likelihood of being able to get picked up as a published designer more likely if you're taking it from a more professional approach. And I think there are some things that you do with your game design approach, from what I've seen and we've talked about, that make me lead me to believe that you do have a more professional kind of approach when it comes to game design. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your design approach and what you do as a designer, specifically to get started in talking about game design. I wanted to ask you a question about how many board games or card games have you designed or worked on up to this point?
So in my head, hundreds of designs, right? But like sometimes I just go to sleep and they just fire away and whatever. But if we define it as something that I've actually spent time on, actually created a prototype, and refined that a little bit, so it's something that is actually fairly functional, maybe not fun, but something that I've actually created that somewhat works and is somewhat what I was trying to do. But that definition may be about 15 different games, probably. They're in my little box. I've got a box of different games at the bottom cabinet of my game design drawer over here. And some of those I've co-designed, actually. I've been designing with a few other people, including Mike Mullins on the solo mode, but also some other designers as well. So
Yeah, and of those 15, how many have been quote unquote published or are in the process of being published?
Two, both with Button Shy. So there's Enemy Lines, which ended up winning one of the design challenges for design a game that you don't need a table or surface for. And that was just an amazing moment for me. And then, of course, Skulls of Sedlec with Button Shy, and that's people are getting that right now. So I'm getting to see pictures on Twitter and people messaging me saying like, "I got my game and it's fun. I'm having a good time," and that's the first time for me seeing that. So it's just been incredible.
Yeah, that's got to be an amazing feeling. I want to point out though that 2 out of 15 is as far as a win ratio is not the greatest, and I for those aspiring designers out there, I think it's important that we acknowledge that publishing a game is not as easy as it is to come up with an idea and make a design and then put it through the ringer and then come out with a product, even when you're going through it with such a professional approach to it. Because I think that there's so much that goes into creating and publishing an actually successful board game or card game that it's worth, I think, pointing that out. That you can work on tons and tons and tons. It makes me wonder that somebody like Reiner Knizia, who has hundreds of published games, how many unpublished games does he actually have, right? But that being said, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about if you were to give advice to somebody. So we were just talking about that whole idea that it can be very difficult to get a game published or designed. If you were to give advice to somebody who was aspiring to start designing, what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, so this may not be an approach that works for everybody, but it's something that's helped me personally. So that's what I'm going to focus on. As to, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I would say to make a small game first. Make a small game with some really hard constraints. And there's a few reasons I say that. Uh, One, I think it will help you focus on what creating a tight, really solid core of your game. And when I say a small game, I mean like, you know, not too many components, like maybe 18 cards or 54 cards, something like this. Like, don't go crazy. I've certainly had crazy ideas, big ideas for lots of, and I've worked on some of those things for a little while, but that's a lot of work, and I haven't learned necessarily everything I need to know to I think finish a big game like that. But one, it'll help you, I think, focus on what the core of your game is and make that really tight, and it'll allow you to like hopefully make something fun with less components, less things. Second thing is I think it will you will probably realize that making a small game is still probably more complicated and more difficult than you thought, than you maybe expected. But hopefully, being a smaller game, you can overcome those things and hopefully complete it, right? And like I said, I've got a whole bunch of games that are in prototype form or that I've completed to some state, and every one of those I've learned something from. So that's the last thing, is that everything that you do, you're going to learn something from. You're going to learn a lot, especially if you get it to a completed state. You're gonna realize some things like, oh, maybe earlier I could have done something like this, or done this, tweak this to make it better. And everything you learn will be applicable to a bigger game if that's your goal. If your goal is to make a bigger game, I think that everything you learn making a small game is gonna help you make a good bigger game as well. And perhaps even the small game idea you had, if you add enough layers, can become a bigger, more complicated game. So that would be my advice: start small.
I love that, especially when talking about button shy games. I think that becomes so appropriate. There's obviously a lot that we of space here that is we've seen from all these different types of designs that come out of button shy that create these really amazing experiences out of a small game. But I don't think that it's always super apparent at what type of design skills come out of having to design in that small space and what that constraint can apply to a designer. When when you have the ability, and I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, but when you have the ability to throw another token or chit or a player board or something into a game, it makes it feel like, oh, I have so many possibilities that I can make this, that at some point it almost becomes too unwieldy because you're like, oh,
Uh,
I've just thrown on all these things, right? So I love your.
every
Go ahead.
every bigger game I've kind of started and worked on has been that. It's just like there's endless possibilities here, and it's really hard for me to just decide what I need to focus on or what I need to do, right? And I feel like certainly adding components is sometimes a great design choice, but not always, right? Sometimes you're trying to patch something that an extra component or an extra rule is going to make it more unwieldy or not fun potentially, right?
Absolutely.
So so yeah.
Absolutely, those constraints can become super important. I think, especially even on those larger designs, if you can apply constraints, they'll hopefully reel in some of your ideas so that they don't become as unwieldy. So I wonder though, what kinds of things have you learned specifically when designing Skulls of Sedlec that you didn't know prior to working on this design?
Yeah, I guess so. I think I'll talk about one thing that I think was pretty interesting for me, just learning. But I learned so many things working on Skulls of Sedlec, including like, when I need to cut stuff after playtests, and it's just like this is too close to this, or this is a little overcomplicated, right? Like, so that was a game I spent a lot of time playtesting and streamlining things. So that's the obvious thing. But the less obvious thing I learned designing this game is that you don't always have to explain everything to your players. And I'm not talking about, let's say, the game design, but I'll give you a specific example. Um, uh, Skulls of Sedlec cards have two skulls on each card. And there's a very important gameplay reason for that. And that is, maybe you are focused on one strategy, like I need to get a peasant, right? The peasant is really what I need right now. And a peasant may come out, but that peasant is attached to something else, right? And now that other thing now makes this really interesting decision. If it was just a peasant card, you would just grab it, no problem. But now that peasant is attached to a criminal. Okay, I can put this peasant here, but then what do I do with that criminal? And so there's an obvious gameplay reason why I paired these skulls together on each card. But thematically, I don't explain that at all. I don't tell the player why when you dig up a grave, why you get two skulls instead of one. And I was a little bit worried. Like people would be like, why is this the case? But literally zero people have asked me that or care, right? And so I was like, okay, that's cool. But I think it leaves a little bit to your imagination. It's like, oh, why is this criminal attached to this royal, right? Or above the royal? Or why is this priest attached to a romantic, right? What does that mean? It allows the players to tell their own little stories. I think, at least that's what I do sometimes when I look at the cards. Hopefully people are also getting that as they play. But the most important thing was just that I didn't have to explain that, right? I let people just kind of, toy with it as they please. So.
Absolutely. I love that about games when I'm playing a game. I love that I can go in and experience and see those thematic connections or even mechanical connections that a designer puts in that are not at the front necessarily blatantly apparent, but as you play more and as you become more familiar with it, I love that treasure that is created by playing a game more and more, that you get to see these things unfold and these experiences line up in different ways. And I like that. And I think that this game in particular has that ability to do that. And I love that. So why don't we talk a little bit more about Skulls of Sedlec in general? And I want to know, why did you choose the Sedlec ossuary as your inspiration point for this game?
Yeah, so I've got some images we can probably share while I talk about this, but I visited the Sedlec ossuary. My wife and I did some traveling. I think it was around 2011 or 2012. We actually got to visit this location, and it's in the Czech Republic. And it's just a really fascinating location. You can read up about it, about the history, about why it's, what it's all about. But essentially, there was these six giant like bones stacked up in this chapel, like these pyramids of bones, skulls and everything. And It was done by this half-blind monk, kind of, back in the Middle Ages. And eventually those bones were then taken, and a woodcarver basically was hired to rearrange those into these intricate, amazing pieces of art. So when you go into this chapel, you see, these big bone pyramids, but then you also see these really fascinating sculptures and pieces. So there is like this giant like chandelier that just kind of is, it's kind of like the centerpiece of the whole place, made out of one of every bone from the human body. There's this like chalices and monstrances. Another really amazing piece is the coat of arms, which is, if you look really closely, it's just got all kinds of really crazy details. And you'd think it would be like, this place would be like creepy and macabre, but it doesn't have that vibe. It's just, you can actually appreciate it for what it is, which is just some really amazing pieces of art that have been put together in a really interesting way. But yeah, when the contest came out as like design something about a real world location, I wanted to come up with an interesting location, and this is one of the places I was like, oh man, I have to make a game based on the Sedlec ossuary. It's just too cool, too interesting.
Absolutely.
And then the hard part was like, how do I actually make a game about something as crazy as that, right?
Well, yeah, looking through these pictures, you can obviously feel the experience and the kind of the vibe that you're going through for with Skulls of Sedlec as a design in itself. So it's fun to see those actual pictures. And are these, you said these are the pictures that you took, right, while you were there?
Yeah. So I took these pictures, yeah, myself. I think these days that photographs are not allowed anymore. So I think I was fortunate to find that window of time when you could still take photographs in the ossuary. There's of course a lot of photos online you can find, but yeah, these were my own photos that I took. So.
Well, not only are you a talented game designer, but you're a talented photographer as well. So I appreciate you having those here. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing those, because that, I think, makes this whole experience of understanding what this game is and where it comes from even more salient, I think. So if then it started from these pictures, this idea, what was it like going from the design contest, having this design forced out within, I believe that contest was a month total. So you had a month to design this, and it wins that contest. And then you have time to go between that and now it being published. What kinds of changes were being made throughout that whole process that you could tell us that would be kind of interesting or unique to anybody who's played it or who wants to play it?
Yeah, just real quick as a correction, it did not technically win. It was a finalist, I think one of the top 3 for that contest, but I think Oreos won that contest, and there were some amazing games that came out of that contest though. So I think Death Valley also. I mean, it was just a fantastic way to do it. Like real world locations now, this makes it just way more interesting because people can ground it in reality. But yeah, it was a finalist, but it did come out really quick, which was awesome, because I think the prototype that I submitted, it was a pretty close to complete game, right? Like I think there wasn't design-wise nothing fundamental that changed from the contest to actually getting out into people's hands. For the base game, at least, it was mostly balance tweaks. I think one of the couple bigger changes was just that the priests were a little bit overcomplicated, and there was still some more streamlining and simplification we could do that just made it a little bit easier to understand. It was just a little bit too complicated. And romantics were a little bit overpowered, so again, just balancing and tweaking them so that they weren't just the one super overpowered card, so that everything was fairly balanced and you can kind of pursue different things during the game, strategy wise. But most of the work after the contest was focused on making the solo mode with Mike Mullins, and designing the skull expansions, some skull expansions to continue breathing life into the game as we go forward. So like the Executioners, which already came out.
Yeah, no, it's fun to hear that what the role of the publisher is coming after you have a design submitted and where it goes from there and seeing those changes. I think you have a picture here as well, if I'm not mistaken, that kind of highlights some of those changes that occurred throughout that whole process, right? Do you want to walk us through kind of what that was like?
Yeah, so this is the whole game design from like my initial idea scribbling on a whiteboard to the final print and play at least. Um, but yeah, it was so taking a look at the image. I think you have it up now. It shows my this was my first idea is like, okay, I'd like to make a game about Skulls of Sedlec. How do I make a game about that? Well, the cool thing is that it's got these giant bone pyramids. So that was my starting point. So it was always started with a pyramid. And of course, it ended up with a pyramid, so that's good. But it started out way more kind of like every card was unique and custom. Uh, uh, everything was different, right? Every single card was unique. So my first prototype ended up being like every skull had a name and it had its own special scoring condition. It also had a suit or a family crest or something like this. And then there was also some other scoring things on the top where you would layer things on top of each other to kind of get different scoring. I didn't have a strong reason for that, but it was just one idea I was playing with. Um, from that, I simplified things, and this is the point where I decided I was going to put two suits on every single card, and that's where I think it got interesting. So that next image kind of shows, I think, the really kind of what the game was, right? That was pretty much the game. After that, it was all just balancing and tuning and figuring out, uh, how to make stuff. The next image is my art that I did for the game. Um, One little unique thing to know is that skull that I drew there for my prototype. It was actually one of the pictures I had taken of one of the skulls that I kind of created a little character out of. So that is one of the original skulls. And
Let,
then that
let me interject
go
real
ahead.
quick and
Yeah.
point out the fact that even your hand drawn prototypes to your now graphic prototype, it shows your video game art background and all of that coming into play. This is exactly what I was talking about early on, seeing your prototypes and the development of them and how pretty they look from the beginning onwards. I don't have that skill, so I just wanted to appreciate that and let other people know that not all designers' prototypes look as pretty as this.
Yeah, I do unfortunately like it's hard for me to look past that like because I have that skill. I want to use it, right? I want to make things pretty when I can. It helps me get into the game and the theme. I enjoy that as well. I enjoy the artistic process. I don't want to focus on art for card games. I want to focus on design now, but I like to play with it every now and then. But then, yeah, from there, I mean, you can tell that obviously my prototype was a heavy inspiration for where the game finally went to with the final art. So it was just fascinating to kind of go through that process. And um, I think what the really interesting change was when I decided to just simplify and just go with suits rather than unique cards. And what I kind of did was take a look at those unique cards and figured out which ones were the most interesting and the most fun. And I just made a suit out of that, right?
Right.
And then I just streamlined it, and made a full game out of that.
Well, I mean, your effort shows in all stages of this as being beyond reproach. It looks really good. The game plays really great. Uh, I wonder of how much work would you say went into this? So beyond the art that we've just talked about in these stages, what did that work entail, and how much work did you put into this?
Yeah, so I'd say the core of the game. So for just figuring out the pyramid and kind of how that worked to that kind of like third image where I decided the two different skulls on each card. That took about a week, just figuring out kind of that core from like I want to make a game about Skulls of Sedlec to essentially having the core of the game figured out. Um, but then it was just a ton of playtesting, and I literally made a ton of playtesting. Like for solo specifically, I spent days and days. I probably played 200 games of the solo mode just myself and recording everything. Um, figuring out kind of just like is this because there's a lot more variability with solo too, with the different scoring, the scoring condition paired with a feature card, and so there's some interesting interactions and variability going on there. And I wanted to at least kind of get a sense and play through all of those. So it was both that and some balancing. I've got some images too, if you want to share like some of the images of some of my work in balancing the game, which I did initial balancing in Excel. And I would take and just in Excel, just kind of take each card and build out different strategies and figure out kind of like, like, oh, if I wanted to focus on maybe royals and priests, or if I want to focus on priests and criminals, or on romantics, right? And I kind of created these different ways you could score, and just tried to make sure that nothing was just too out of whack. So I just did that really quickly in Excel, just because that was really fast for me to do. Just kind of abstract, take a look at the game, and of course that didn't get you all the way there. I had to, actually bust out the real game and play it as well.
Right.
After that, to find some other things like, oh, the romantics are still overpowered, even though the spreadsheet says they're fine. It's not necessarily the case in reality, right? When you actually sit down and play with people, it was just a little bit too easy to get royals too quickly, right? Or sorry, romantics too quickly. So we still had to tweak that a little bit afterwards. And the next one shows some pretty graphs, and or I don't know how pretty you think graphs are, but I think graphs are pretty as a big nerd myself, and producer. So here's showing more of my producer kind of like this is what I did more, and a lot of the production world is kind of figure things out and graph things out, because I enjoyed that. But this is taking a look at the solo mode, so just playing the solo game over and over again with all the different conditions and features and all the different ways you could play and strategies, and just making sure, again, nothing was too out of whack, and then just figuring out the averages for things and making sure that everything was everything was pretty close, and going in the direction we wanted to. And it also helped us figure out kind of what cards should pair, because there's a feature on one side and a scoring condition on other. This helped us figure out how to pair things as well. So
I want to point out, again, going back to what we were talking about initially, approaching game design from a professional standpoint, and what that kind of looks like, and being able to pop up the hood and look at what game design is a fun process, because when you go and look at it and take it from that approach, it's more than just fun, if that makes sense. Like, there's more than just sitting down and playing the game, playing the card. Playtesting and playing a game is, for a designer, oftentimes about work and having goals and setting those goals and finding specific ways to track those. Would you say that that's been your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fortunate thing is the game is pretty quick to play, right? So I can still have fun even when I'm working on it. But yeah, absolutely. And I think that it was really fun to kind of just like look at what's going on underneath the hood of the game, and kind of understand after once it got to a certain point, like little ways I could tweak things, right, to improve it a little bit. But yeah, no, absolutely, that's been my experience as well.
Yeah, and I love seeing the data behind it and all that. With all of that you've tracked, it makes me wonder, how often do you actually win at Skulls of Sedlec?
Certainly I've made games that I'm terrible at, that I almost never win. But Skulls of Sedlec is not that game. I usually win most games. I've played it enough now that I know all. I know all the cards. When it's the last couple cards, I know my chances. What I'm going to get. So that gives you a little bit of an advantage, of course. But yeah, when I play versus my wife, or play versus Jason, when we've played, I usually win.
Does that mean you're a card counter?
Yes. I mean, it's just burned, and I'm not even counting.
Right.
It's just there. After 200 games of playing the game, like playing Skulls of Sedlec, it's just there.
So then, because you're so familiar with Skulls of Sedlec, what kinds of unique or interesting Easter eggs, tidbits, little bits of information do you have about that you could share with us that we would find interesting?
Yeah, I'll talk about a couple things. One is maybe a detail probably most people will miss, but I appreciate was that if you look at the Romantic's nose, it's actually an upside down heart, which I thought was really neat. And it was one of the things we talked about in when looking at some of the art. It had a different nose originally, and I was like, oh, but there's this heart shaped nose you have. Put that on the Romantic, and so you can see, it's got a little heart shaped nose. Um, Little dev trivia. So as I was developing the game and playtesting, a lot of the designers on the Button Shy Discord, which is a fantastic resource, I think, is another thing for new designers. Um, so as I was playtesting and finding playtesters, I believe it was Jamie Thule I was playtesting with, and we did a playtest exchange. He was also entering into the same contest, and we realized that actually we were using the same drafting mechanic. And so there's a drafting mechanic in Biblios, which is you take 3 cards from a draw pile one at a time, and you decide whether one at a time you decide whether you're going to keep that card, give it to your opponent, or put it in kind of a central area for some other thing. And he was doing the exact same, like they're literally the exact same thing. And it's not like it was new; it had been done before. So, but it was just kind of fascinating to see that. So after that, I realized like, oh, we should probably change it. I think Jamie did it better than me. I felt like his game had a better kind of thematic reason for doing it, and I didn't have a great thematic reason yet for that card draft mechanic. So and maybe even I think Jamie even suggested doing some sort of like creating a graveyard kind of like setup, and so that is ended up being what it is now. And I think that's now that graveyard is now a great thematic element to the game. So I think it's what draws people to the game. Like I think people like that choice, that decision space where you either take one of the face-up cards if it has already been dug up, basically, or you can dig by taking any 2 piles, flipping over to both of those cards, and taking one of those 2 cards. You can't take anything else. You have to take one of those 2 cards. You flip, so it's a little bit of risk reward right there, but also giving information and something else to your opponent. So that wasn't the original one. That wasn't the original draft. It was through playtesting with another designer and finding out that he had the exact same. He was doing the same thing, that I decided to differentiate it, and I think that was obviously for the benefit. So thank you, Jamie.
I love that, and I love as well that Discord server. There's so many useful and helpful people on there. But for those who may not have played it or are still looking into Skulls of Sedlec, the way that those cards are laid out is there's 6 piles of 3 cards each, which in my mind, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Dustin, is that those are like your grave sites, your graveyard that you're digging the bones out of, and so each time you dig, you get a different set of bones that you're getting out of there, which, by the way, I think is a really fun little thematic thing. So I love that came up and was able to make it a better experience, because that totally is a more unique experience that way, I think.
Yeah, no, it definitely worked out. So
now,
super happy with it.
Now, so I want to ask you towards the end. I'm going to do some lightning questions, just some spitfire questions. But before we do that, I have one last question that I want to ask you in regards to design and games and things like that. And that is, what game or games have inspired you as a designer, and why?
I think, and I'm going to go back to small games again, because I think this was kind of an aha moment for me. I remember the first time I played Love Letter, and I didn't get it, right? Like I was like, it's just a small game. It seems like it's all luck, right? But then I played it another time, and I played it another time, and then I realized the genius of the game. And I know it's not a game for everybody. It is a very simple game, but I find it to be very clever and very elegant in its design. So that was this moment where, like, when games were getting bigger and crazier and more components and all these minis and just some amazing games coming out, I then noticed that there's these small games also coming out. And so this was for me a design moment where I was like, oh my gosh, like this is really cool. I'd like to do something like this someday. Um, but yeah, it's just Love Letter happens to be one of my inspirations for why, like, I want to make small games. At least some of my games should be small games, and they should be really tight, really fun, quick games. And of bonus, they're portable, and you can take them anywhere with you. So
I I totally agree. There's a reason Love Letter is as popular as it is, and there's a reason why it's sold as many copies as it has, and it's in big box stores because it can do such a clever and accessible thing at such a small space, and everybody can do it. I'm all about not about using the space of a game for what it's intended for. And Love Letter doesn't pretend to be anything that it isn't. It does a great job at doing exactly what it's supposed to. And I love that. I think that is a great source of inspiration. Okay, so now for these lightning questions, I'm just going to ask you a series of questions, and I just want your answers spitfire before we kind of close this out. So, to start that off, what is your favorite border card game?
I'd say my favorite one currently, and of course there's many, but my favorite one currently is Quacks of Quedlinburg.
Oh, good one. And what is one of your
It's really
favorite
good,
books
really fun.
or book series?
I really like. I've done some traveling in my life, so this is one of the books that made me decide I want to go travel, and so I would recommend for anyone who thinks they want to travel or might have that itch is Vagabonding, an uncommon guide to the art of long-term world travel. It's kind of like the philosophy of traveling the world. Get yourself in the right mindset to do it, and experience places for what it really is, and not what it's sold to be or what you might expect it to be. So. That's what I
You
recommend.
have me intrigued, at least. Other than border card games, what is one of your favorite hobbies?
I've really, throughout my life, enjoyed cooking and grilling, and that's been lately since we've been doing a lot of cooking and grilling at home lately. That's come in super handy. So that's something I love to do with my wife.
Oh, that seems like a perfect segue into another one of these questions. What is a favorite food of yours?
I love I love really good, like authentic, amazing Mexican food. I think Mexican food is some of the like Mexican like cuisine, and it's just great food culture. And specifically, there's a soup called menudo, and it's usually sold on weekends, Sundays only. It's a little different because it has tripe, so that might turn some people off. But if you, but for me, I love menudo.
I don't know why, but I've heard Menudo mentioned in the last week at least 3 or 4 times. So it sounds like it's a sign that I need to go try some Menudo.
Yeah, I think so.
What is a unique talent that you have?
Uh, I would say making overproduced game overview videos.
Touche, touche. I've seen the
Yeah,
product of
yeah.
that, and that is true. You have that unique talent. Okay, last question. If you could visit anywhere in the world, and this seems appropriate to what we were discussing about your favorite book, where in the world would you visit?
Um, I think one place that's been on my list for a while that I have not had a chance to go to is Patagonia in kind of southern South America, southern tip of South America. It just looks so stunningly beautiful. I love nature, I love mountains, and just amazing, beautiful scenery. So that would be a place that I would love to go visit.
And there's a whole brand named after it, and that's not by coincidence. I'm sure it is beautiful.
Yeah, no.
Well, Dustin, I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me about Skulls of Sedlec, about design, about all the things we've talked about. It's been a blast. I really appreciate it. Before we exit out, is there a way that people can get in contact with you or talk to you that you would like to share out there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter. I think it's at Dustin Dobson. You can find me on Twitter, and I'm almost always around the Discord, the Button Shy Discord. So if you want to join Button Shy's Discord and talk to me or a lot of other small game enthusiasts or other game designers, there's a lot of us on there as well. So those are the couple places you can find me.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time again to chat with me. It's been a great experience. I'll have to be sure to get a game in of Skulls of Sedlec with you at some point.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Well, that was our interview with Dustin Dobson. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Skulls of Sedlec is available on the Button Shy website. You can purchase it there. You can also, like Dustin mentioned, go on the Discord, go on Twitter, go on all of these different sources to find Button Shy games. And there's a lot of different resources and things out there that you can discover beyond Skulls of Sedlec. Button Shy Games has lots of amazing small games, wallet-sized games that are worth looking into. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to us on Discord and Twitter, etc. It's been great. Thanks for joining us, and have a lovely day, night, evening, wherever you are.